Hello and welcome everyone. A very happy Tuesday to all of you. Today is the fifth session of our Day One and Beyond series. We started with Technical Quick Start in September, followed by Business Operations and Networking in October. We started November with Cloud Operations, and today we'll talk about security. The Day One and Beyond series takes you through a series of topics and activities related to building out on Oracle Cloud. These events are hosted on Oracle Cloud Customer Connect, which is our Oracle community forum for customers and end users. You can create a free account to join in discussions, post questions, and look for upcoming events on various topics. My name is Renu Bhatt. I'm a TPM with the Customer Enablement team, and today I'm joined by Olivia Ferda and Joey Hall, both cloud engineers here at Oracle. And I'm really thankful to our content experts, Johannes Merman, Creighton Swank, for joining as well. Now, before I hand it over to them, our usual reminders. Please use the Q&A box down at the bottom at any point throughout the session to drop your questions. Hopefully, we'll have time for a live Q&A at the end as well. Obviously, we are recording this, and if your colleagues, you think they might be interested in the series, we'll be posting this as a recording, and you can share that with them. With that, I'll hand it over to Joey.
Thank you, Rainey, for the introduction. So hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining today. My name is Joey Hall, and I am a staff cloud engineer here on the Customer Enablement team, and looking forward to walking you through the fifth session of our enablement series for Day One and Beyond. So today we'll be focusing on security, and I'll go over the agenda here in a second. But first, I'd like to give my colleagues a chance to introduce themselves as well. So Olivia, if you want to say hi.
Thanks, Joey. Hi, everyone. I'm Olivia Ferda, and I'm Associate Cloud Engineer on the Customer Enablement team with Joey, and I look forward to today's session.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Creighton Swank. I work on the field CTO team here at Oracle, and I'm aligned to the manufacturing industry. I have a lot of experience with multi-cloud and large enterprise cloud migrations, so looking to kind of add some context to a lot of these conversations and looking forward to the session.
Hi, everyone. Johannes Merman. I'm a security architect, been with Oracle for 20 plus years. I'm part of our North American shared security services team, working with customers, setting up OCI tenancies, any kind of security related services, that sort of thing. Back to you, Joey.
Perfect. Thank you all. So we're going to have some good discussion today around a wide variety of topics that have to do with security within Oracle Cloud. And we're going to break this up into two different sections today. We're first going to talk about security of the cloud, so some of Oracle's security principles, some of the security that's built into OCI itself, and then we'll spend a lot of time focusing on security in the cloud. So there'll be a lot of the different services that you will be able to take advantage of to increase your security posture across a wide variety of areas of your environment. We'll talk about each of those as we go through the slides. But really, by the end of this session, this is going to be a foundational session that's really going to give you all awareness of what is available to you within OCI, what's some of the security features behind the scenes, and then making sure that you're able to communicate some of those security principles and understand the different use cases for some of the major security areas that we're going to talk about today, like identity and access management. We're going to talk through the core to edge security model so you can understand what that is and really be able to kind of differentiate between when and why you would use a lot of these different services. And to kick things off, we'll talk about Oracle security principles. So really what went into the development of a lot of the security services for Oracle Cloud? What were the things that we had in mind when we are building out these services, when you are starting to use these within these environments? So what are some of those key principles that we're going to walk through? So we have simple at the beginning, right? We want things to be easy to use. We have a lot of pieces within OCI and interacting with the console where a lot of stuff will be either already available to you by default, or some of the stuff you'll be able to just quickly go in, click enable, and have that service available for you to use across your environment. Transparent as well. There are going to be a lot of tools that we talk about that are going to allow you to get visibility into your environment, see what's going on. That could either be in terms of how your resources are performing, but also can be looking into different things with logs and audit logs to track what's actually happening in your tenancy so you can get a good idea of, is there a potential security vulnerability and how are you going to react to that? And that comes into prescriptive, as you see there on the next portion. So not only do we want you to be able to see what's happening within your tenancy across the wide variety of user activity or resource configurations, we also want you to be able to we want to provide you with ways that you can remediate a lot of these issues and prescribe ways in which you can improve your security posture. So you'll see that across a lot of these services as well. And we want to also make sure that once you have these types of recommendations, we want to make sure as much of this can be automated as possible. So many of the services will give you automated responses, or will have automated security built in for you that you can take advantage of. And lastly, here at the end of that cycle, we have unified. So all of these different services are going to be made to work together in one ecosystem, where one service might provide you with a general overview, and then the other ones might be able to tackle more specific use cases or get more granular into the details of that specific service, depending on the type of security vulnerability or area of your environment that you would like to further drill into. So all of this really working together, all of these are key components that are going to go into each of the services that we'll talk about today. And when we talk about security, we have to talk about compliance. So these are a list of some of the compliance programs, some of the compliance certifications that we have within OCI. This is not an exhaustive list. I can show you where you can go in and download these within the console for a second, so you can see how would I access some of these if I need them, but also just showing some of the current ones that you have available, different ways that you can maybe use certain services to meet different compliance requirements depending on what your requirements are, and then walking you through where you could find them. So from a high level, we're going to talk about what's called the core to edge security model. We're going to go through on this slide here and talk about at each area of your environment, what kind of security services or what kind of security is built in at each level. And you can see there at the bottom, we have identity, which is going to really be prevalent throughout the entire thing. You can see that spans the bottom of the slide across each area, because that's going to be one of the major components of security. It's going to be how you're going to give people or resources access to do things, to view things within your tenancy. And we'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah, and just to jump in here, Joey, I think it's really important to understand that this is kind of the foundational, aspect of cloud security, right? When you move from an on-premise data center to the cloud, you're used to having, kind of that ultimate control and separation of duties. So accidentally exposing a service to the internet is very, very hard to do in practicality. It involves typically multiple teams. In this case, when you move to the cloud, IAM is really the boundary, and that security and policy is kind of foundational to not only discourage, but also prevent, a lot of that accidental exposures, and kind of the additional layers of control with respect to audit and visibility really become key to both securing and then obviously noticing when things maybe have deviated from that security policy.
Exactly. And when you get into the different areas here as well, as people start to maybe provision resources, we talk about the different areas of security within compute, like who's going to actually have access to deploy, who's going to have access to list, to manage, right? You're going to be setting those boundaries based off of your different resource groupings. And then that's going to allow you to control a lot of that access boundary to begin your journey with an OCI and set up security from like the first step.
Yeah, you'll probably hear me refer to the term blast radius several times throughout this presentation, and that's really what it is. Understanding the access that someone has as part of a role, or a service has as part of a policy that's applied to it. It really becomes understanding what is the kind of total allowed permissions and scoping that to be as small as humanly possible.
Exactly. Once you have that identity and access set up, right, we can start to talk about the different areas in terms of data, compute, networking, all of these that you see here. So again, we'll focus on these throughout the presentation, but you could just see some of the different services that you can leverage at each portion here. So encryption at rest, encryption at motion, those are going to be there for a lot of the different services. You'll have the ability to take advantage of the vault service for managing your keys, or data safe on your databases. We can go into networking as a big portion, where depending on how you set up your networking architecture, how you choose what kind of access, what kind of traffic you're going to allow to your environments, the types of subnets, public, private, the gateways that you use to communicate, right? All of that's going to contribute to your security posture within networking as well. And then again, you want to be able to see what's going on within your tenancy. So a big portion today will focus on CloudGuard, and that will touch upon how you can further dive into other services to get more detailed views and be able to react two different potential security vulnerabilities. And then out at the edge here, we have DDoS protection, and we'll also talk about the web application firewall to help give you additional precautions at the edge of your environment. And first here, so Creighton talked about that blast radius, right? So minimizing the impact to different groups of resources based off of who can access what can access what. And one of the concepts within OCI that goes along with this is going to be compartments. So this is going to be the logical grouping of resources that you have within OCI that you will get to set up to determine, okay, how do I want to group these resources and who do I want to give access to the resources within these buckets, in these compartments, right? So here you can see within our mock company here, this is Vision Corp. We use this for a lot of our presentations, but we've separated out different areas based off of team. And then you can see even within that, we have like information services or information technology. This will be further separated into maybe the types of resources, further delineations of the information services team, and then different groups will just get access to those through the process of authorization.
And this is something, Joey, that I see customers struggle with quite a bit as they come, especially from AWS environments where, you know, that sort of ultimate blast radius is an account, which in Oracle parlance is equivalent to a tenancy. And so customers kind of come in and make the assumption that in order to sort of preserve that same level of identity segmentation, they have to provision multiple tenancies in an Oracle world. So it's really, you know, important that I think we level set in the beginning that you can have that same level of protection and segmentation under the umbrella of a single Oracle tenancy. Now, certainly if we want to add multiple tenancies, that can be done and that can be managed through organizations. But at the end of the day, I think from an operational simplicity perspective, the compartments add a layer of protection that I really want to make sure our customers are aware of.
And that's really good to bring up here too. So you can see within our tenancy has that root compartment. Right? So every tenancy has the root compartment. And then instead of having multiple accounts, multiple tenancies, right, we're able to delineate within that through this concept of compartment. So you can see we've broken that up here. Your whole company could have this root compartment, and then you could break it out within there without the need for the additional accounts like Creighton mentioned. And to actually give people access to these compartments through the process of authorization, the way this works within OCI is by default, no one's going to have permission to do anything unless they're given permission to do so. So it's a deny by default method. But if you would like groups to get access to do certain things to your resources, right, that user will be added to a group, and then that group will be referenced in a policy. So you can see here, policy A will allow group A to do something. So in this case, manage the resources in this compartment. So you can see policy A is attached to compartment A. And now that level of permissions will be given to those resources. And then similarly with compartment B, just with a different group and a different level of access here. So manage versus list. So this is going to be how you're going to actually set that type of access when you get started within OCI to make sure people have the right level of permission. And this fits into kind of the overall identity and access management service within OCI. So you can see there's a lot to identity access management, not just those policies through authorization that I just talked about. But there's going to be a lot of other enterprise features that are going to help you create your users, manage your users, the different types of authentication methods that you're going to use. How are you going to do inbound authentication? So how are users authenticated into the service? As well as how do you provision your users? How do you manage the life cycle of those users? You can see that at the bottom there, identity store and lifecycle management. And then outbound authentication and SSO. How are you going to really allow single sign-on, how to give access to those other applications, those target applications as well? You're going to see a lot of different features that are going to be prevalent within the identity and access management service here. And then at the top, we just talked about identity access management policies, but again, that comes into the component, all the different areas of identity access management here. There is an update to this coming soon. I don't know if Johannes or Creighton would like to speak on that at all in terms of identity domains.
Yeah, I can touch on that. And also just taking a step back, the general features here in terms of inbound authentication SSO, very often the use case we see is, that other clouds are being used as well. And there's one central kind of enterprise identity provider. And obviously, by way of federation, those integrations are very seamless. So customers having existing enterprise identity providers can hook them into this OCI IAM for single sign-on and also user lifecycle management, right? So for one place, you add users, you assign them to roles, and those will be provisioned to OCI as needed or deprovisioned. So it's all kind of one coherent way of doing things instead of having to manage users in 5 different places. So that's a very common use case. But otherwise, yeah, so depending on kind of the tenancy you're looking at, whether you get a new tenancy today, you will have a concept of identity domains, which you can look at as different user repositories. So you can use different identity domains. For example, you can have your production users in one identity domain, and you can have your development users in a different domain and have different authentication mechanisms and policies. So basically you can differentiate your user population instead of having them in one big kind of user repository. So that's something that's being rolled out, and new tenancies have that. So that's definitely going to make it easier and more, give a more unified way of handling users and just having to do it one place in the OCI console.
And I think for that update, if you don't currently have it, a lot of that's going to be done behind the scenes by Oracle, and you're just going to see that change within the console as they add that additional feature, that additional functionality to IAM. But if in the follow-up, we can also post the blog that talks about what customers need to know in terms of this change. But really not a lot of effort needed on the user side for it. And once you have that foundational level where we talked about identity and access management, your users, who gets access to what, when you can start provisioning things within your environment, the next area, kind of walking down that core to edge security model, was data. And we're going to talk about data protection here briefly. We have different types of storage, where you can store your data, where you can store your information. And at a lot of this stuff, the data is going to be encrypted at rest. You have the ability to encrypt in transit. We're going to talk about being able to either use Oracle managed keys to encrypt your data, or bringing your own keys and managing that all through our Vault service, which we'll talk about next. Object storage, you also have that encryption at rest. You can also bring your own keys, but you also have the ability to create what's called pre-authenticated requests. So for private object storage buckets, let's say you want people to only have a certain time-limited access to that information, you can send them a pre-authenticated request, and then they can access that information for a limited period of time. And then for database, we're going to have, there's a lot of areas of database security, and we're really going to touch upon data safe today, because that's going to be kind of your overarching database monitoring tool. It's going to look at user activity. It's going to look at, give you some data masking, help you identify potentially sensitive data as well. So kind of an overarching database management, database security tool, but really just giving you an idea of some of the levels of data protection within OCI for these different types of storage. So something you're going to want to be aware of and take advantage of as you start to put information and work with it in OCI. In that first piece here, we talked about keys, right? We want to see, you can bring your own keys, you could utilize the Oracle managed keys, and we have a service that's going to help you manage the lifecycle of those and can help you meet the different standards that are needed potentially for your environment. And this is going to work with a lot of different services within OCI, right? As you're going to be needing to use those keys, you can integrate these even with, let's say you're trying to we talked about automation there at the beginning. You could even utilize the infrastructure vault to maybe provision your keys through Terraform scripts. And then you can utilize Resource Manager and help that provide an extra level of automation so that when you are deploying these, it will be less of a manual process. But really here, native integration with a lot of different Oracle services that will allow you to really work with these keys, manage them in a more efficient fashion. I don't know, Creighton, if you have any best practices, or Johannes's, for using the Vault service, or how you can see this working maybe differently than some other, maybe if you worked on-prem in the past, how this would be different.
I think I'll touch on a couple of things, and Johannes, you may have some context to add as well. But I think the nice thing about this is that a lot of the control operations here are API based and driven through any sort of CLI or SDK based actions, which then triggers log events that can be audited to ensure compliance as well. So that is kind of one of the nice things here, is that, you know, this is sort of integrated with that sort of overall security portfolio.
Yeah, and obviously, yeah, it is a managed service, right, at Oracle that handles the uptime, and it is integrated to a lot of the other services. So by simple way of either clicking, you know, or APIs, you can easily use those keys in different services. One thing to point out as well is, besides the master encryption keys we have, like using for a block storage or object storage or databases, you also have like the secret storage, where you can use that for a secure place to store. If you need to store your, you know, your typical username, password, whatever you need in a config script, which you obviously don't want to store in a config script, you could also use this service to store those kind of values in secure place and access them when needed. So that's also an added benefit of this Vault service.
Perfect. Thank you both. And we talked about another area of data security, and one of that is securing your database workloads. So OCI Data Safe is going to be a way for you to actually really monitor, assess, and kind of react to different areas of your Oracle databases. So it could be all Oracle database cloud services used for on-premise, in cloud compute, and for third-party clouds as well. But it's going to give you a couple different areas to help you really secure each of these databases that you choose to enable this on. So this will be an enable process. We mentioned making this easy to use, making this simple. You'll go in for that database and you can click enable within the console to enable that to be working with whatever that database system is. And here you can do a security assessment. So it can let you know generally what is the general security posture of your database. It's database configuration. It'll look at your user accounts, security controls, and then give you reports with different recommendations on how you could potentially mitigate risk for that database. And it could also take a look at the users who are interacting with your database and help maybe identify any high-risk users depending on the type of activity that they have with your database. And then also helping you find maybe potentially sensitive data and being able to mask that sensitive data as well. So you might need to maybe create copies of your production data to support your dev and test activities, and then you can utilize data masking to replace that sensitive data using that tool in here, and it can help you identify what that sensitive data may potentially be. And this also can do auditing as well. So you can have database audits for your database that you have this enabled for, and it can provide you with that information as well to help you get visibility into all aspects of your Oracle database. So a really useful tool that you can enable on your database systems.
Well, one thing to add here as well, Data Safe ties into the event notification framework in OCI. So when it does its continuous audit log monitoring across all the databases, it can actually raise events if there's some, you know, suspicious audit log records, and that can be fed into the event system of OCI, and then further on, obviously, to other kind of systems to then, you know, create tickets and, you know, create raise alerts at the, you know, customer side.
And that ties into that unified piece that we brought up at the beginning too, where these services are made to work together in this single OCI ecosystem. So yes, you can have events be triggered and take action upon those, and you can automate those actions as well. And that's going to be also very true within CloudGuard that we're going to talk about next, which Olivia is going to actually cover for us. So Olivia, I guess I'll hand this one over to you.
Thanks, Joey. So before Joey jumps into the console portion of the session, I just want to touch more now on some of the detection, monitoring, and prevention services in OCI. So one of them being CloudGuard, and this is a service that's going to help you monitor, identify, and maintain a strong security posture in OCI. So you use this service to examine your OCI resources for any security weaknesses. And so how this works is you designate your compartments or your logical grouping of resources as the target that you want to monitor. And then upon detection, CloudGuard can suggest, assist, or take any corrective actions based on your configuration. And so just some terms to be aware of when working with CloudGuard is first target. So once again, you're going to target compartments to monitor user activity or resources within. And that user activity is going to be user activity on resources within those target compartments. And you're also going to have detectors, and it's just going to be a list of rules that CloudGuard will be looking at and flagging any detected problems. And there's different detector recipes that you can set up. So you can make use of the Oracle detector recipes, or you can also use custom ones by cloning the Oracle recipes. You're also going to have problems, and you could be notified of these problems via the notification service, and these problems are going to have varying severity levels associated with them. And then lastly, you're going to have responders. So each problem will have a recommendation, which will either be manual recommendation where you can choose to take action or not by dismissing it. You're also going to have automated responses, which will be there for certain problems that are flagged that you can go in and remediate without having to go into the service to fix.
And just to jump in on this too, real quick, Olivia, yeah, I think it's important to note that this is a fairly common pattern that I see customers using across multiple clouds, right? So you set a policy and then you put events in place to look for deviations from that policy, right? So it's kind of the trust but verify aspect of cloud security. So you'll see often a lot of third-party tools that will offer kind of that single pane of glass management across the cloud. The benefit here specifically, though, is that these responders are unique and configured to take actions sort of out of the box on OCI resources. So there's nothing that prevents you from feeding third-party single pane of glass tools, but looking at this sort of configuration and you know the breakdown between detectors and responders, these lists, and Johannes, you can keep me honest here, but I believe these are updated fairly regularly. New things are added, new features are added as well. And as we go down that path, you'll start to see that, you know, common misconfigurations or, you know, things that we've seen customers struggling with are fed back into the product, and you get that sort of native cloud control. So what the benefit to you is immediate resolution of these instances, right? So if something gets built and it's out of spec, it is remediated almost immediately. You don't have to wait for a ticket to be opened or things of that nature. It is kind of handled right out of the box.
Mm-hmm. And then once again, you can use the Oracle detector responder recipes, or you can also customize them. So maybe you can have a prod environment with more stringent detector rules and a dev with less severity. So you definitely have customization there. Great. So here's just a simple example of how CloudGuard works. So let's say right here, we have a compartment with a bucket, which is designated as a target in CloudGuard. And so I have a user, and that user goes in and it makes the bucket visibility public. And so this then sets off the rule that the bucket is public with the problem severity of critical. So this problem is then flagged. And so there's two different routes for solving. So you have the more automated option right here. So if CloudGuard is enabled, you can be notified via the notification events service and use functions to do something about the problem. So that's the more automated route. Or you can also do more of the manual route, and where a CloudGuard operator can go in manually and take action or dismiss it. So just simple overview of how CloudGuard operates. So you can do more automated option here, or you can do more of a manual route.
Also to add to this, because a very common pattern is actually to use sometimes both, but at least the cloud event. We always say make sure the cloud event is enabled. What that means is when CloudGuard finds a problem, it will emit an event. Again, the OCI event service then receives that and can do something with it. Very often, we actually send those events on to a customer SIM system. You know, it could be a Splunk, Logarithm, whatever, and that system would then be responsible for obviously, you know, collecting that data, but also sending out alerts to the proper teams to then go and look at that problem. And, you know, often they would have information in that log record that says, or, you know, which problem is it? So they can straight away click that link and go back to CloudGuard and see the details and then remediate. Once they've remediated the problem, they would then say, hey, I've resolved it. Or maybe if they say, we'll just dismiss it, that's a sign of, you know, we should probably change our security baseline. We don't want to just dismiss problems too often. So.
Yeah, as somebody that's had to carry that pager in the middle of the night, if I get events that aren't actionable, I get cranky.
So that is CloudGuard. So CloudGuard is going to monitor your resources and alert you of any potential issues across your tenancy, but there's also several other security services that allow you to further look into different areas of your cloud environment. So one of them being the OCI vulnerability scanning service. So this service generates reports with metrics and details about any vulnerabilities which you can take action on. And it does this by routinely checking your host for any potential vulnerabilities. So it can help you identify several types of security issues in your compute instances. So let's say, any ports that are unintentionally left open, that might be a potential area of attack to your cloud resources, or enable people to exploit other vulnerabilities, or maybe OS packages that require updates and patches to address vulnerabilities, or OS configurations that people might exploit as well. So stuff like that. And then after each of those scans is complete, you can view the vulnerabilities report, which will show information about a specific type of vulnerability that was detected in one or more of those targets.
Yeah, and to add, so you have the vulnerability service, as you said, that basically does these kind of scans, whether it's port-based, whether it's packaged and stuff like that, or it's actually files, some files that checks for log4j, stuff like that, obviously as well, to when it scans the compute instance. And actually the findings will be as well available in CloudGuard as a problem. So the same approach you use in CloudGuard, kind of sending problems to a SIM and all that, as soon as you enable vulnerability scanning, those findings will flow as problems, and have one way of looking at that as well through the same kind of system, which makes it a little bit easier than jumping between different kind of dashboards, basically.
Certainly, and as we go through these different tools, you'll see that they tie into each other, especially with CloudGuard. So next, going into security zones. So CloudGuard is more reactive. Security zones are going to be more preventative. So security zone is associated with a compartment and a security zone recipe. So when you create and update resources in a security zone, OCI validates these operations against the list of policies defined in the security zone recipe. So if any security zone policy is violated, then the operation is denied. So for example, a security zone policy forbids the creation of public buckets and object storage. So if you try to create a public bucket and security zone that has this policy, or if you try to modify an existing storage bucket and make it public, you're going to receive an error message. So similarly, you can't move an existing resource from a standard compartment to a security zone unless all policies are met. And so Johannes or Creighton, can you create your own security zone policies? How customizable is that?
Yes, so we started out with what we call the maximum security zones, which is pretty preventive and paranoid, which actually just cater to very, very specific use cases, right? Everything was locked down. We do have customizable security zone recipes today, and that's definitely something that customers are using to, certain things. For example, let's just say you're not allowed to create public buckets. You're not allowed to create public subnets, things like that. That's easily something you can turn on and have the security zone prevent from even happening, versus CloudGuard will also tell you, hey, you have a public bucket, but that's after the fact, right? So we see this combination today where for specific areas, you can use the security zones that really, will prevent stuff, and CloudGuard will then, find other things that, reactive.
Right. Security zones, or once again, more preventative, and CloudGuard's going to be a little bit more reactive. All right. So going into web application firewall, or WAF. So the OCI WAF is a regional base and edge enforcement service that is attached to an enforcement point. So this can be a load balancer, as we see on this diagram, or it can be a web application domain name. And really just the main goal of WAF is to protect your applications from malicious and unwanted internet traffic. So Johannes, do you have like a use case or example of WAF that you've seen?
Yeah, so the two kind of use cases, right? So you have the WAF at the edge, obviously, which obvious use case, right? You want edge protection, right? But there's also the other use case where because we can attach the WAF policies to the load balancer, you get that north-south, but also east-west protection now, right? So you can actually get a lot more granular protection inside of your network topology and not just at the edge. So we see customers using that. Quite a few customers use the load balancer attach WAF policies to the load balancer feature versus just a WAF at the edge.
And so here's a little bit more on how WAF works. So this quick graphic just shows some of the different layers in the WAF service to either deny or allow access. So it acts as a reverse proxy that will inspect all traffic flows or requests prior to them arriving at the origin web application. And it also will inspect any requests going from the web application server to the end user. So this will allow you to kind of control data leakage from your application servers, as well as protecting your service from outside threats. And so just going back to earlier, how these are kind of all connected. So the OCI WAF is integrated into the OCI console, along with many other applications and services offered by OCI, which allows you to do things like OCI tagging with WAF policies for cost tracking, or use the OCI identity access policy to control access to WAF management. And you can also use OCI audit service to log WAF changes. So going into certificates, so it just provides you with certificate issuance, storage, and management capabilities. So this includes certificate revocation, automatic renewal. So within a service, you can create your own private certificate authority. And if you have a third-party certificate authority that you already use, you can import certificates issued by that CA for use in your OCI tenancy. And so just going back to CloudGuard, so CloudGuard also integrates with this and will keep an eye on expiring certificates and warn you of the expiration. And then last service, before we jump into the console to showcase CloudGuard, just want to go into the OCI Bastion service. So it improves your security posture by providing secure access to the private target hosts within a virtual cloud network or VCN. So it's really if you want to access hosts without allowing access over public IPs. And the access to target hosts via Bastions is time-bound, so it provides restricted and time-limited access to targeted resources that don't have public endpoints. So Johannes or Creighton, how is that access governed? Is that through IAM policies? How is that being governed?
At a high level, a Bastion server or a jump server, as I've seen some questions in the question section kind of allude to, they're often used interchangeably. So I won't speak specifically to the Bastion service. Johannes, you're welcome to jump in on that. But at the end of the day, you're absolutely correct. What this does is typically expose a specific endpoint to allow users to authenticate. That authentication can happen with any operating system authentication strategy, right? So if it's Windows, it could be Active Directory based authentication. If it's Linux, it could be key-based or any sort of directory authentication that the operating system configures. Best practice is to kind of go down the path of enabling multi-factor if possible. But Johannes, if you have clarity on kind of what that Bastion service would look like.
Yeah, so even before that piece of it, there's the fact of actually creating the session, right? That's all governed. So one thing is you need privileges in OCI to create a Bastion server, right? Then on that you create sessions. You need privileges to do that. And you can also further in those IAM policies set conditions of who can do that, right? And which user can you act as, for example, the OPC user being a very powerful user if you log into Linux box using OPC. So you can control all of that with IAM policies, the same kind of IAM policies you use for everything else in the OCI console. So this is really to think about this ad hoc. If you need ad hoc access to a certain server that's in a private subnet, you can use this Bastion service, right? Some use cases still require jump hosts, just kind of where you have certain tooling on it as well. But for all the use cases where you don't need any of that tooling, this is just an easier and safer way of handling it because you don't need to maintain that Bastion server, right? Oracle does.
Yeah, and there's a couple of questions specifically on the distinction between the two here, but at the end of the day, absolutely the Bastion service is kind of a quick and easy way to give you something that is click to provision right through the console, gives you that access to those private resources. But if there are additional security controls that are needed, you would go down the path of provisioning a Bastion server. And again, you have to have access from an IAM perspective to be able to do it. You have to be able to, allow security authentication in that space. But the trade-off there is that then you are managing that server, right? So there's patching and all these other actions that come with it. So it's kind of, the easy button from a Bastion service perspective, but might not meet all the use cases, in which case you would provision a service. And if it needs to be a hardened image to be compliant with security policies, that's the path you would go down, is to build that separate server and manage it that way.
And also one thing to note, any admin actions like when created, deleted, update, or fetch Bastion in sessions, they're going to be recorded in OCI event and audit service. You can keep track of that as well through there. So yeah, that concludes the slide portion of the presentation. So now I'm going to pass it over to Joey to take us into the console to cover CloudGuard.
Thank you, Olivia. Let me share my screen one more time. Can everyone see the console?
Yep.
Perfect. So here, if you have been on our sessions before, you've been familiar with the OCI console and its layout. This is going to be the first thing that you see when you sign into OCI. And today we're really going to focus on Oracle Cloud Guard. So if you want to navigate to any of the services, if you know what the service is, you could type it in up here, or you could pin it in this section if it's something that you frequently use. Or you could go up to this top left and you'll see all of the different service categories within OCI that you can have access to. Here, if we type in, or if we select identity and security, you could see all of the different services, or at least most of them, that we covered throughout the presentation today. And today we will be focusing in on CloudGuard. So when you first get into CloudGuard, this is a service that you will have the ability to use immediately within your tenancy. You will just have to go in and click enable and approve a certain set of policies that will allow CloudGuard to start to scan all of the resources within your target compartments that you specify here. So once you first get in, you're not going to see all of these security ratings. You're not going to see the risk score until you actually enable it and choose what you would like to go in and monitor. So that process is fairly straightforward. You will just see an enable button here at the beginning. It'll walk you through those policies. And then after that, you can start to actually configure how this will look. So here, the way you would typically get started with CloudGuard is by, let's go into our targets. And here, there are two approaches that you can take when you get started with CloudGuard. One is you could choose to utilize the Oracle managed recipes and apply that to the root compartment. And that would just give you a quick start to look at all of the different resources within your tenancy right away. And then you could configure afterwards. The other way would be the more methodical approach, where you would determine which compartments do I want to target? How do I want them to be monitored differently? And then once you edit those recipes, you could then create your targets from there. But let's say you wanted to do the faster method. We would go in, create a new target, give it a name. So let's say we wanted this for the whole tenancy. And then you could give it a description, but I would just select the root compartment. You can see that includes all child compartments here. And by default to you would have all of these Oracle managed recipes available. And then you could click create, and you could begin working within CloudGuard and start seeing some of those problems potentially being flagged within your tenancy. But if you did want to do the configurations, right, you wanted to edit some of these recipes before you actually apply them to a target compartment, you could go into the recipe section, and you would have those three Oracle management here, and you would clone those to have your own recipes that you could then edit and configure. So you could go, let's say, went to the configuration recipe. I could clone this, and then that would be able to be edited within here. So that cloned one would show up, and then I could go into that clone recipe and start to adjust some of the rules that you see. So there are a couple different recipes. I don't know if you saw, there were 3 on the detector recipe portion. So this one specifically has to do with resource configurations. One of the other ones will have to do with user activity. So those are separated out for you. And if you go into here, you can see just a quick view to all the different things that CloudGuard is able to look at for you. And I'll just do a quick scroll. I'm not going to read through all of them. Don't have time. But if you want to go back and watch the video, you can pause and see all of the different areas here. But if I wanted to go in and edit some of these to make this recipe different than the Oracle managed one, because I'm going to choose to maybe monitor a production environment differently than I would a development environment, right? And some of these risk levels may change, or some of these rules may or may not be needed for those environments. I could go in, edit that rule, and it would let me choose, do I want this to be enabled or disabled for this particular recipe? Do I want to, maybe this is a high risk for my production environment, maybe it's a low risk for a development environment, right? I can configure that within here as well. You could also use what's called a conditional group. So this is an area where you could provide additional granularity to any of these rules. So let's say if I wanted this to only apply to resources within a certain region, or users within a certain group, or maybe only within a specific IP address range, right? You could set that within a list, and then you could access that list from here. So then whatever list you choose, that will be applied to that rule. And then also you would have your user activity ones. So if we went into the activity detector, you can see these are just going to be slightly different. These are all going to be the actions that people have taken within your tenancy. So if someone updates an image, if someone terminates an internet gateway, right? These can all be flagged based off of that user activity. A lot having to do with IAM. And you see different, we talked about the Bastion service, right? So someone creates a Bastion session, deletes a certificate authority, right? All of these are in the user activity base. And you would do the same process if I went through and edited this. And then you could go down, let's see, I'm going to show you an example of this. So I think I have a list for regions currently. You can see managed list. I have a regions list. So this specifies a couple of regions that I would like this to apply to. So you would just have that here. And I'll show you where to access those right after this. But once you have those recipes edited, you'd go back to that target section, and then you could apply these custom recipes to any of these compartments that you want. So I could go in and select that custom one, and now that will be applied. One thing to note there, you might be wondering, well, if the root compartment covers everything, and then this also covers a child compartment within the root, what takes precedence? That would be the more specific, or the child compartment would take precedence if you have a recipe for that and the ones within. But once you go in and you've selected your targets, you selected the recipes that are going to work with those targets, you will then get to see all of this fun information here to help you identify, where can I improve my security posture? How can I go in and start actually remediating some of these issues? So here are these two scores at the top will give you an idea of how your tenancy is doing. So looking at the number of problems and the varying severity levels, looking at the total number of resources that are being monitored and the associated risk levels of those. And you can utilize both of them to get an idea of kind of how your security posture is doing for your tenancy. Recommendation. So every problem is going to have a recommendation. You could view them all here, or you could do them in the more problem-specific route, where you would just view the recommendation associated with that problem. And then you also have a couple different breakdowns here. So if you wanted to look by severity level, or if you wanted to get an idea of maybe there's a trend within some of the security issues, maybe it's a certain compartment that's causing a lot of issues, maybe it's mostly happening within a particular region or even a resource type. So you can see a lot of ours are associated with user activity here. Then you could also do it based off of location for the ones that are user activity based. So I could see, where are these problems being flagged, which part of the US. I could click in and then see which problems are associated with that location in terms of user activity, so not resource configurations. And then lastly, responder status. So a lot of these will be automated responses, or potentially automated responses, that you'll just go in and click remediate if that option's available. So we have 81 of those pending that I could do, instead of having to go in and do a bunch of manual action. And then this will show you kind of how everything's improving over time, or what's going on within your tenancy. So your security score, any new problems. So you can see, was there maybe a go live and that flagged a bunch of problems, and then it's been back to a steady state since, right? And then has anyone been taking any action here? And what are you doing this for? Is so you can actually go in and view the problems and take action upon them. So that's all set up in overview to see what's going on. But let's actually go into a problem example to show you what this would look like. So a bunch of different critical risks here, but you could filter these down depending on the environment that it's in, the compartment that it's in, the risk levels. If you want to just go and start with all the critical and then move to the lower severity, right? You could just filter that way and also filter by time. So we talked about maybe there's a go live and you just want to look for any issues that are associated with that go live. You could make that time window fit so that you're mainly looking at those issues. And you could also do both, so time window and say compartment if your environment's within a particular compartment. If we take that simple example there, bucket is public. You could see there is a remediate button here that I could click and then see the potential remediation. It would just say you need to add this statement so that CloudGuard can take this action for you, and then I could click remediate and have this resolved without actually having to go into that service and take the action there. And you can get all the information about this problem, about this resource here as well. And every problem will have a recommendation. So if you don't have this button available to you, it means CloudGuard cannot take that automated response because there are a lot of different options maybe to remediate this issue. But it will provide you with a recommendation on how you could go about manually doing it, and then you can mark it as resolved from here, and that will all get logged within this history. So any action that I take, even if I dismiss it, right, that gets logged in this problem history and responder activity. And then people can say, oh, well, this was dismissed at this date. Why was this dismissed if there's an issue, right? And then once those are resolved, you could go in and see that on the remediation timeline to see if the action has been taken. And then the last piece that I would like to go over, we talked about managed lists, so just showing you where you could do that. So again, this is when we went into those rules within the recipes, we saw that you had the control group where I could apply these different lists. So here I could create this list. I had the regions example. Select the compartment, and here you could choose the different type of list. So country, IPv4 address, region, right? All of this here. I could go in, select one of these, and then my options on the next page will differ depending on what I selected. So here, since I selected region, if I'm just doing US regions, I could select Ashburn, I could select Phoenix, and then whenever I use this list, it will be restricted to working for these regions there. That would be the list here. So you can also add or edit from here as well. So if you want to add an entry or delete an entry, you can do that from here afterwards. And that's a quick CloudGuard overview. I think we did it pretty fast, but these are quick sessions. We had a lot of content. So we can use the last 5 minutes to maybe hop into Q&A, but I do thank you all for listening to the presentation and watching the demo. So is there any questions in the Q&A?
Hey, Joey, I had a few CloudGuard items, just want to wrapping CloudGuard up. So in terms of targets and kind of how typically it's deployed at customers, right? So the typical process is that we always create a target at the root level for two reasons, right? We have full coverage across your tenancy, so any new compartment added is covered by that target. Second, IAM related events live at global, so a root level target is necessary to capture those IAM level actions. And then sometimes, as you said, we'll have targets below for specific compartments. In terms of the detectors and responders, we often start out by cloning them and using the clone, even though they're the same as the managed ones, we haven't changed anything, but from the get-go, we clone them and we attach the cloned ones. So then when we have workshops, we go through and tune CloudGuard and can straight away work with those cloned recipes. There's always tuning involved with CloudGuard, right? To get the noise ratio down, right? There are a lot of things CloudGuard finds. And for some customers, some things are important, other things are not important. So there's also a tuning exercise that always happens on those cloned recipes. Just kind of my 2 cents from the field.
No, that's great context too, because you have the setup, and every customer is going to have a different way in which they're going to want to start using this service, right? So being able to tune it to your needs is going to be a very key component, because that's going to affect your score. It's going to affect what problems. You don't want to get a lot of noise, as you mentioned too. So that's a great thing to bring up. All right.
Joe, you want to look at the Q&A and see if we want to answer any of those questions?
Yes, let's take a look. So we have, a lot have been answered while we've been talking, so I appreciate the rest of the team looking through in there as well. Let's see, Johannes, it looks like you're answering one. Are there APIs currently? Is that, I'm guessing that's particularly pertaining to CloudGuard?
Yeah, it took the answers. Obviously CloudGuard was the context, but Oracle is API first. So you have APIs for all different services. You can use very often, it's like the Python API. We also have Go, we have different languages. But a lot of customers also use infrastructure as code, Terraform to simply interact with CloudGuard, creating recipes and tags and all that in CloudGuard using Terraform.
Can you show slide 24 one more time, Joy?
Yeah, maybe we can go over the links or the different components of here.
So you guys will have access to these links at the PowerPoint presentation, but I'll also copy and paste it in the chat.
And you also see hands-on labs. So we do link that. So if you want more hands-on experience in different areas of OCI, definitely would recommend exploring that.
And a lot of it for those labs, the labs use our Live Labs platform, and some of them will have an environment through Live Labs that's already there for you, depending on the lab. And if you do not, like, you have two options of running within your own tenancy, or it'll walk you through setting one up for, let's say, a free tier account. Let's see, we've got time for maybe one or two more questions. Did any of these pop out to you all?
Joey, can you just copy these links and put it in chat? For some reason, my PowerPoint is taking ages. Thank you so much. Okay. I think this was a great session. I'm also going to paste one more link here. Awesome. Thank you so much, Olivia, Joey, Johannes, and Creighton. Really great session. I appreciate your time and help here with conducting these sessions. Big thank you to everyone who joined us for the session today. Our next session will be Database Quick Start after 2 weeks on November 29th. So please go ahead and register now using the link I shared just now. All the links are there in the chat. People are asking for links, so you can find the links in chat. Otherwise, you'll receive an email with the PDF and the recording of this session as well, so you can find remaining stuff there. Thank you again for your time today. We'll see you all next time then. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.